Why was everyone staring at her rifle like it had crawled out of a museum? The desert sun was already high enough to bleach the firing range into a flat sheet of glare, and every glint of polished weaponry made it worse. 33 Marines prepped their gear that morning, but only one of them carried a rifle that looked older than all of them combined. Corporal Elena Voss adjusted the sling across her shoulder, the steel biting faintly into her skin, the way it always did. The old M14 hung there, heavy, scarred, its barrel darkened by time and its stock etched with scratches that had stories no one in her squad cared to hear. She heard the whispers before she reached the firing line. $10 says she doesn't qualify. 20 says that thing doesn't even fire straight. Hell, my grandfather had better gear in Korea. Alina didn't turn. She didn't need to. She'd heard it all before, at every range, every qualification, every training exercise where shiny rifles defined status more than skill. The military had a way of making judgment fast and apology slow. The M14 wasn't regulation. Not anymore. Most of the Corps had long traded it in for lightweight M4s or sleek, customized DMR platforms that looked like they'd been printed in a lab. Hers looked like it had been dug up. Still, she ran her hand along the stock, feeling the familiar grooves. The marks weren't where they were memory. Her father's hands had held this rifle. Her grandfather, too. Each scuff, each scratch was a story carved into steel. But to the others, it was just a rusted joke. Staff Sergeant Chun's boots crunched on the gravel as he approached. His clipboard was tucked under one arm. His eyes went from her face to the rifle and back again. "Corporal Voss," he said, voice clipped. "You understand this is the Advanced Marksmanship Qualification course. 800 meters, multiple positions, sustained fire. This isn't basic rifle qual." "Yes, Staff Sergeant," she replied, calm. He paused, the kind of pause that carries disbelief. "We have standard-issue rifles available if your equipment has issues." "This rifle functions perfectly, Staff Sergeant." Chun's brow furrowed, the faintest crease of disbelief. "That's a Vietnam-era M14. Most of those were decommissioned before you were born." "Yes, Staff Sergeant, I'm familiar with the platform." His sigh was almost a chuckle, caught halfway between amusement and concern. "Your call, Corporal, but understand equipment counts in your score. If that thing fails mid-qual." "I fail, understood." Her tone left no space for argument. Behind her, laughter rippled from the staging area. "Hey Martinez, look at that thing," someone called. "She bring it from a museum." Sergeant Kyle Torres, tall, confident, and armed with a precision rifle that gleamed like it belonged in a catalog, pointed in her direction. He was the unit's top marksman, proud of it, too. The kind of Marine who believed skill could be measured by price tag. "What's she planning to do with that antique?" he said. "Qualify for a historical reenactment." Martinez snorted. "That thing belongs in a case, not on a firing line." Alina ignored them. She checked her weapon the way her father taught her, slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Action clear, chamber clean, barrel sound, trigger pull 3.5 pounds crisp as memory. The metal was cold, even under the desert sun. She took that as a sign steel doesn't complain about heat or weight or judgment. It just does its job. Captain Morrison's voice cut through the chatter. "Listen up." The range fell quiet. Morrison was the kind of officer who carried authority in tone alone. Clipboard in hand, he paced before the firing line. "The AMQ course has a 43% pass rate," he said. "That means more than half of you won't meet standard. Precision, consistency, reliability, those are what we're measuring today. If your weapon isn't up to the task, now's the time to say so. Once we start, there are no do-overs." A few Marines exchanged glances. One hand went up towards. "Sir, question," he said, feigning innocence. "What's policy on non-standard weapons? Some of us have invested in advanced optics, custom barrels. Others," his gaze flicked toward Alina, might be handicapping themselves with outdated platforms. A few chuckles broke out. Morrison followed his gesture, eyes landing on Alina's rifle. His tone sharpened. "Corporal Voss," he called. "That weapon, is it serviceable?" "Yes, sir." "Armorer inspected?" "Yes, sir, passed yesterday." "Then it's authorized," Morrison said. "But if it fails during qualification, you fail. Understood?" "Understood, sir." The laughter quieted, but the stares didn't stop. 32 pairs of eyes, some amused, some pitying, a few curious, every one of them waiting to watch her fail. Chun's voice broke the tension. "Relay 1, take positions. We'll begin with supported prone at 300 meters. 5 rounds, 5 targets. You'll be scored for accuracy and time." He scanned the group. "Corporal Voss, you're up first." Of course she was. Alina moved to her lane. Tors set up beside her, his rifle's barrel gleaming, scope reflecting sunlight like a crown jewel. "You sure about this?" he muttered. "No shame in using proper equipment." She didn't answer. The M14 settled into her shoulder like a handshake from an old friend. The world shrank, wind, heat, laughter all gone, just her breathing, the sound of her heart, the faint weight of the trigger. Chun's voice rang out. "Targets will appear for 45 seconds. Engage when ready. On my mark." 32 Marines waited. Most weren't watching their own lanes, they were watching hers. "Mark." 5 targets snapped upright. Her first shot cracked through the desert stillness, deep, heavy, unmistakable. The sound of a 7.62 nade around, leaving steel that still remembered war. Recoil hit her shoulder like an old rhythm. Action smooth, chamber ready, next shot seamless. 5 shots, 5 seconds. Then silence. Tors was still on his third. Martinez was finding his second. For a long moment no one spoke. The air shimmered with disbelief. Chun's spotting scope traced downrange. Lane 3, 4 hits. Lane 4, 3 hits. Lane 5, Sergeant Tors, 5 hits, 4 center mass, 1 inner ring. He paused, lifted the scope again. Lane 7. Silence stretched. 5 hits, all center mass. Every Marine froze. Tors' head snapped toward her. "That's impossible. The targets were only up for 45 seconds. You fired in 5. Chun didn't answer him. He only wrote something on his clipboard, slower than before, as if his pen wasn't sure it believed what it was recording. Captain Morrison walked over, binoculars raised. He studied the 300-meter targets, 5 perfect hits, spaced within inches of each other. "Corporal Voss," he said slowly, lowering the binoculars. "That was an unusually fast engagement time." "The rifle functions efficiently, sir," she said simply. The captain's jaw tightened, not with anger but curiosity. "We'll see how it performs at 500. Relay 1, clear the line," Chun ordered. "Move to staging area 2. Alina rose, slinging the M14 across her shoulder. The metal was warm now. Her shoulder ached faintly, a reminder that perfection still has a cost. Tors fell in step beside her. 300 meters is one thing, he said, his tone sharpened by pride and disbelief. But at 500, you'll need optics. That scopeless setup won't cut it. Alina glanced at his rifle, custom optic. Laser rangefinder, bipod and suppressor worth more than her base pay. "I appreciate your concern, Sergeant." Tor's lips pressed into a line. "You think this is about pride? This is math, Corporal. At that range, wind reading and holdover." She cut him off gently. "I know." Chun's voice rose again. "Relay 1, 500 meters, unsupported kneeling, 7 rounds." Tors exhaled, muttering, "All right, let's see her luck run out." Alina knelt. The sand pressed against her knees, the rifle balanced across her support arm. No bipod, no rest, no margin for error. The targets rose. Tors fired first, smooth, precise. Suppressed report soft, almost elegant. Elena's turn, heavier bark, rough and raw, echoing through the range. Her rhythm didn't change. No hesitation, no adjustments, no panic. Each pull of the trigger was muscle memory, not thought. 7 shots. Then stillness again. Chun's voice came through the heat shimmer. Lane 3, 5 hits. Lane 5, Tors, 7 hits, 5 center mass, 2 inner ring. Pause. Lane 7, 7 hits, all center mass. The range went quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop for a second. Morrison lowered his binoculars, expression unreadable. Chun's pen hovered over the clipboard like he wasn't sure the paper deserved the truth. 2 perfect stages. Elena ejected her magazine, cleared the chamber, and stood. The rusted rifle hung at her side like it had nothing left to prove. But the day wasn't over, and neither was she. What no one else knew, not Tors, not Martinez, not even Captain Morrison, was that she hadn't come here to prove a point about an old weapon. She'd come for something else, something that still waited downrange, just beyond their understanding. Something she hadn't told anyone. Not yet. What did perfection look like at 700 meters? Most Marines didn't know. They'd never see it, never even get close. That distance wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about patience, control, and something most shooters didn't even understand: silence. Elena knew silence. It had been her companion long before the Marines, long before the rifle. The second relay finished their turn, and the results spoke for themselves. 5 shooters, 2 passes, 3 failures. The wind across the range had picked up, flicking sand in small spirals. Conditions were worse now. Relay 1, Chun called, his voice competing with the gusts, to the 700-meter stations. It wasn't a suggestion. Elena stood, the weight of the M14 settling into her bruised shoulder. She could feel the tension building around her, Marines whispering, side-eyeing, calculating what they had just witnessed. 2 perfect stages. Iron sights. A rusted rifle. Impossible, yet undeniable. Tors moved beside her again, though he said less now. Confidence had cooled into curiosity, pride into something quieter. He adjusted his scope one last time, checking wind drift, elevation, all the math that defined precision for shooters who needed their equipment to think for them. Elena didn't adjust a thing. Captain Morrison stood behind the firing line this time, clipboard loose in his hand, expression unreadable. He wasn't here to oversee qualification anymore. He was here to understand. This stage, Chun began, is unsupported standing. 9 rounds, 9 targets appear at 15-second intervals. Wind variable, miss 3, you fail. The words settled over the range like a sentence. Unsupported, standing, 700 meters. Even Tor's jaw tightened. That position broke professionals. It exposed the smallest tremor, the faintest hesitation, the smallest doubt. The line went quiet. The only sound was the wind, unpredictable, shifting, testing them. Relay 1, Chun said, raising his hand. Stand by. Elena took her position. The M14 came up to her shoulder like an extension of her own arm. Her cheek settled against the stock, the spot worn smooth by generations before her. And for a moment, she wasn't on a firing range. She was back in Iraq, dust storm raging, breathing through her sleeve. A convoy pinned down by snipers no one could see. The memory came fast, the heartbeat under stress, the sound of bullets slicing wind, and the calm that followed when training overtook fear. Silence, steady breathing, squeeze. A click in her mind, the moment when chaos disappeared. The same silence settled over her now. Targets appearing, Chun called. On my mark. A silhouette rose at 700 meters, a small dark shape flickering in the shimmer of desert air. Elena fired once. The M14's recoil snapped through her shoulder, strong, deliberate, perfect. Target dropped. Tor's shot followed 2 seconds later. Others fired too, but Alina had already shifted her stance, eyes calm, the rifle still steady. Another silhouette rose farther right, half obscured by the wind's shimmer. She adjusted, not with thought but instinct. Another shot, another drop. 700 meters, standing, no optics, no hesitation. By the third target, whispers behind the line had turned to silence. No one moved. No one wanted to break whatever rhythm they were witnessing. Chun's spotting scope tracked every hit. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Wind shifted. Targets changed angle. Marines cursed under their breath, compensating too much, too little, chasing corrections they couldn't make fast enough. Alina never stopped. Third shot hit. Fourth hit. Fifth, center mass again. Morrison leaned toward Chun, his voice low. Smart scope. Chun shook his head. No, sir, iron sights, standard trigger group, I checked it myself. Then how the hell is she? The eighth target appeared, wind from the southeast, gusting. Most shooters' bullets would drift 5-6 inches off, hers didn't. It fell clean, center mass. Torres had stopped firing entirely. His hands hung over his rifle like a man trying to understand faith. The final target rose, far left, the hardest angle. Alina's stance shifted, subtle, controlled. Her breathing slowed. The rifle fired. The sound was louder this time, maybe because everyone else had stopped shooting. Target fell. 9 rounds. 9 hits. All center mass. For 3 long seconds no one spoke, then Chun's voice cracked the air. Lane 7, 9 hits, all center mass, perfect score. No one cheered, they just stared. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the desert itself respected what it had just seen. Torres turned toward her, his expression stripped of arrogance. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Alina cleared her rifle, checked the chamber, slung it over her shoulder. Just a Marine qualifying on the AMQ course. Chun's voice was different now, softer, almost reverent. "In 10 years," he said, "I've never seen a perfect standing at 700, not once." Martinez stepped forward. "That rifle," he said, eyes wide, voice trembling with disbelief. "What is it?" Alina looked down at the weapon resting against her shoulder. The sunlight caught the rust in faint orange streaks. "It's an M14, she said. "Same kind your grandfather carried. The difference isn't the rifle." "Then what is it?" Torres pressed. "You just outshot everyone here with a relic." She looked him in the eyes, steady, calm. "The difference is how you treat what you're given." Captain Morrison approached, clipboard forgotten, binoculars dangling uselessly at his side. "Corporal," he said, "I want to see that rifle." She handed it over. He inspected every inch, barrel, trigger group, chamber. Nothing modified, no custom parts, just care. The kind that came from years of knowing every scratch, every vibration, every sound. "This is completely stock," he muttered. "No match barrel, no upgrades, how the hell?" "Properly maintained," Alina said. He looked at her not with disbelief anymore, but dawning respect. "Continue the course, Staff Sergeant," he said to Chun quietly. As he walked away, he didn't return to the control tower immediately. He stopped halfway, turned back, and just watched her, the way one might watch a mystery slowly unfold. The 700-meter stage ended, but the mood on the range had shifted entirely. The Marines who had mocked her rifle that morning now studied it in silence. The whispers had changed from ridicule to reverence. But Alina knew this wasn't about the rifle anymore. It never was. When the call for the next distance came, even the air felt different. "Relay 1 moved to 800 meters, Chun called. "Supported prone, 10 rounds." The challenge that broke almost everyone. Less than 20% of Marines ever hit all targets at this range. Fewer still did it in this wind. Alina walked to her position. Her shoulder throbbed. The bruise deepened with every round, every recoil. She adjusted her stance, pressed the rifle into the dirt and looked downrange, 800 meters of rippling heat and unseen variables. Behind her, a quiet voice tores again. "You really think that antique can keep this up?" Elena didn't turn. "It's not the rifle I'm testing, Sergeant." He frowned. "Then what are you testing?" "Myself." He blinked, and for the first time that day, didn't have an answer. Chun raised his voice. "Targets will appear for 3 minutes, 10 total. Engage as acquired. Supported prone. Wind variable, gusting 18 knots." The targets looked small, barely visible through the haze. Elena lay flat, cheek resting against the worn stock. She slowed her breathing. Inhale, exhale, pause. Her world shrank again to one rifle, one line of sight, one target. The first silhouette popped up. Crack. Hit. Second. Crack. Hit. Third, fourth, fifth. By the sixth target, Torres had stopped pretending not to watch. He leaned forward, eyes narrow, tracking every movement. "She's not even reading wind," Martinez whispered. Torres shook his head. "She is, but it's muscle memory. She's reading it through her body, not through her scope. That's not skill, that's instinct." Morrison listened from behind the line, arms crossed. "She's beyond the standard," he murmured to Chun. "This isn't qualification anymore, it's demonstration." Chun didn't reply. His eyes were locked on his spotting scope. The 8th target dropped, the 9th. Elena didn't blink. The last target appeared, center of the line. The rifle barked one final time. 10 shots, 10 hits. Perfect again. Silence, then applause, raw, spontaneous, breaking protocol entirely. Morrison didn't stop it. He walked toward Elena as she cleared her weapon and stood. "Corporal Voss," he said, his tone formal but softened. "That was the finest shooting I've seen in my career." "Thank you, sir." She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just acknowledged the words and stood there, quiet, shoulders squared, rifle hanging at rest like it had nothing left to prove. Around her, every Marine who had judged her that morning looked at her differently now. Not as the woman with the rusted rifle, not as the joke, but as something else, something that made them question every excuse they'd ever told themselves about their own limits. As they broke for hydration, Torres approached again. This time no smirk, no rank in his tone. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About the rifle, about you." Elena accepted the water bottle he offered. "You made a judgment," she said quietly. "We all do. The question is what we do once we're proven wrong." He nodded. "Learn from it. Then you'll be fine." Behind them, the rusted M14 rested against the bench, sunlight glinting off its corroded surface. To anyone else, it still looked like a relic. But to those who had watched it speak that morning, it looked like something else entirely. Like truth. The day wasn't done. 2 more distances remained. Moving targets next, then the stress course. The range would remember what it saw. But for Elena Voss, this wasn't about records or reputation. This was about something she hadn't told them. Something the M14 had carried long before she ever did. What happens when perfection begins to make people uncomfortable? That question lingered in the air long after the 800-meter stage ended. Applause had faded, but the silence it left behind carried something heavier: awe, disbelief, and a quiet kind of fear. No one mocked her rifle anymore. No one dared. They just watched Corporal Elena Voss, the woman with the rusted M14, as if she were part of something they couldn't explain. By the time the next relay was called, even Captain Morrison had stopped pretending this was a normal qualification. He radioed the base command an hour earlier, requesting permission to record the next segment. Historical documentation, he'd called it, but the truth was simpler. He needed proof that what he was seeing was real. The heat rose higher. Mirage lines shimmered across the desert floor, turning distance into illusion. Next stage, Chun called. Moving targets, 900 meters. You'll track and engage 9 silhouettes crossing the field at variable speed. 2 shots per target. 1 miss counts against final average. He paused, looking directly at Alina. This stage breaks 90% of shooters. She gave a single nod. Understood, Staff Sergeant. Behind her, Tors leaned on his rifle, still watching. He wasn't laughing anymore. He wasn't even trying to hide the respect in his eyes. You've already passed the course, he said quietly. Why keep going? Alina adjusted her sling, voice calm. Because I'm not here for a score. Tors frowned. Then why are you here? She didn't answer. There were things about this rifle and about herself that words couldn't explain. Chun raised his hand, shooters ready. The desert went still. Even the wind seemed to pause, like the range itself was holding its breath. The first target appeared, a steel silhouette sliding left to right through heat and haze. Alina tracked it with her eyes first, then her body. Smooth, fluid, no rush. The rifle rose, followed the motion, paused, and fired. Crack! Crack! 2 perfect hits. The steel rang twice. Chun called the hit through his mic. Target 1, 2 confirmed. The next silhouette appeared faster, weaving slightly. Alina's breathing slowed. Her focus narrowed. She moved with it like the rifle was alive in her hands. 2 more shots. 2 more hits. Martinez whispered under his breath. She's not just shooting. She's reading movement like she knows where it's going before it does. Tors nodded. Anticipation, that's not luck, that's pattern recognition, that's thousands of hours. More than that, Martinez said softly, that's pain. By the 6th target, even Chun's voice began to falter as he called hits. Target 6, 2 confirmed. The range had gone completely silent again. Morrison leaned against the observation wall, arms folded, his voice barely audible. That rifle, he murmured. It's not just a tool to her, it's memory. Chun glanced his way. You think she's shooting for someone? I think she's carrying someone. The 7th target rose, smaller, faster, more erratic. Alina exhaled through her nose, shifted her stance, and fired. First hit center mass. Second headshot. No pause, no flinch, just calm execution. It wasn't arrogance. It was something deeper, a silence that came from knowing loss too intimately to ever fear failure again. By the 9th target, Morrison gave up counting aloud. He just watched. When the last silhouette dropped, Chun lowered his clipboard. His voice broke slightly when he said it. 9 targets, 18 rounds, 18 hits. No one spoke. Even the sound of the wind felt reverent. Alina lowered her rifle, cleared it, and stepped back. Her hands trembled slightly, not from adrenaline, but from exhaustion. Each shot had cost her something invisible. She sat on the bench behind the line, the rifle across her lap. The metal was hot, the wood warm, the air thick with heat and disbelief. Tors approached slowly. You could have stopped hours ago, he said quietly. No one would have blamed you. Alina looked at the rifle, running her thumb along one deep scratch in the stock. It was shaped like a lightning bolt, thin, crooked, permanent. My father carved this one, she said softly. Tors hesitated. He was military. She nodded. Marine sniper, served in Fallujah, later deployed to Sangin, never came back. Tors' voice softened. I'm sorry. He taught me everything before he left, she continued, still staring at the scratch. How to breathe through a scope, how to read wind without flags, how to wait for a heartbeat to settle before a shot. She paused, the faintest tremor in her voice, and how not to hate the silence that follows. Tors didn't know what to say. He just stood there, a man who had run out of all the wrong words and finally found none left that mattered. Alina looked up at the horizon, eyes unfocused. When he didn't come back, they shipped me this rifle, said it was recovered from the field, cleaned, inspected, decommissioned. Torres glanced at the weapon. This exact rifle. She nodded, the same one he carried. He exhaled. So when you said you weren't testing the rifle. I was. For a moment the entire story made sense. The silence, the focus, the refusal to let it fail. This wasn't about proving herself. It was about keeping him alive in the only way she knew how. Morrison had heard everything from a few meters away. He walked over, slow and deliberate. "Corporal," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "You didn't have to use that rifle for qualification. You could have retired it." Elena looked at him, her eyes steady but not hard. "Sir, some things aren't meant to be retired." Morrison nodded once, the kind of nod that carried more understanding than rank ever could. "Fair enough." He turned to Chun. "What's next stage?" "Stress course, sir. Urban layout, time limit, multiple targets, variable distances." Morrison exhaled. "Then we'll finish this right." As the Marines reset the range for the final event, the air thickened with tension again. Torres stepped beside her, adjusting his own rifle. "You ever miss?" he asked, half teasing, half in awe. "Sometimes," she said. "When?" "When it matters." He frowned slightly but didn't press. The stress course began with a siren. Each Marine had to move through simulated cover, cinderblock walls, vehicle husks, broken barriers, engaging pop-up targets under time pressure. Speed, accuracy, composure, the trinity of survival. Elena crouched behind the first barrier. The siren screamed again. "Go!" She moved low, controlled, no wasted motion. The first target rose 30 meters. She fired once. Crack. Hit. Second target, 60 meters, moving. Crack. Hit. Third side angle, partial cover. Crack. Hit. Torres watched her from the next lane, moving faster but missing one in the rush. He cursed under his breath, adjusted, kept going. Elena didn't rush. Her rhythm was steady, fire, move, breathe, like she'd done it 1,000 times in her dreams. By the halfway point, sweat streaked her face, dust clinging to her skin. Her breath was steady, her heartbeat slow. She rolled behind a concrete barrier, checked her mag, 3 rounds left. Last 3 targets. She took one more breath, stood and engaged. Crack. 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 3 clean hits. Then silence again. When she stepped across the finish line, Chun clicked his stopwatch, his eyes wide. 4 minutes 23 seconds, he said. Perfect run, fastest of the day. Morrison just nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. That'll be hard to beat. Torres finished 30 seconds later. He walked over, panting but grinning. "All right," he said between breaths. "I give up. You win. You're the better shot, the better Marine, the better everything." Elena smiled faintly, her first of the day. "It's not about winning, Sergeant." "Then what's it about?" She looked at him, really looked, eyes distant, thoughtful. "It's about remembering why you started." The words hung in the air like smoke. Behind them, the recording drones hovered in the heat, their cameras whirring softly. The footage would go to the Corps archive, a training reference, they'd call it. But those who saw it would know better. It wasn't training, it was testament. When the qualification ended, Morrison called the squad together. "Marines," he said, "what you saw today wasn't luck and it wasn't magic. It was mastery, discipline, memory. That's what this uniform means. You don't get to mock what you don't understand." He turned toward Elena. "Corporal Voss, the Corps owes you a debt. You reminded us that the weapon doesn't make the Marine makes the weapon." She nodded once. "Thank you, sir." The day began to fade, the light stretching long across the desert. When the others packed up, Elena stayed behind for a moment. She walked to the 700-meter mark, where the brass casing still glimmered faintly in the sand. She knelt, brushing the dust away from one spent shell, still warm from the sun. She picked it up, rolled it between her fingers, then looked toward the far horizon. Her father used to say something about distance, that it wasn't measured in meters, but in memory. Now she understood. Tor's voice broke her thoughts. You all right? She turned slightly. Yeah. He nodded, then hesitated. You ever think of putting it in a case? That rifle, I mean, it's history. She smiled faintly. It already is. She slung the M14 over her shoulder, the old strap creaking. But history doesn't belong in glass. It belongs in hands. As she walked back toward the range office, the sun hit the rifle one last time, a brief flash of gold across rust and steel. And for that moment, even the relic looked alive again. Some nights the past doesn't knock, it just walks in. That night was one of them. After the qualification range cleared and the desert fell quiet, Corporal Elena Voss sat alone at the edge of the barracks compound. The world had cooled from fire to embers. A faint wind tugged at the flag above the command post, its motion slow, tired, and proud. She leaned her rifle against her leg, the same rusted M14 that had silenced every doubt that morning, and stared into the horizon. Somewhere beyond those dunes was another desert, another lifetime. That was where she'd lost him. The sound of boots approached from behind. Tor's again. She didn't look up. You planning to stay out here all night? He asked, voice gentle. Maybe. He sat beside her, careful not to disturb the quiet. You don't talk much. She smiled faintly. Most people talk too much. He chuckled, fair. Silence stretched between them again, not awkward, but respectful. The kind that only exists between soldiers who have both seen the world through a scope. After a while, Tors said, You mentioned your father. You ever talk about him? Not often. Why not? Because people listen to stories about war like they're movies. But for me, it's a grave. He didn't reply, he just waited. She glanced down at the rifle. The steel reflected the faint glow of the moon, rough, pitted, alive with memory. He carried this rifle in Sangin, she began. Second deployment. His unit got pinned down during a sweep. 2 Marines hit. He stayed behind to cover the medevac. They said he was the last voice on comms when the signal went out. Tor's voice softened. They never found him. She shook her head. Just the rifle. It was recovered 3 months later during a mop-up. They said it was still functional. He exhaled, low and quiet. And they gave it to you. Yeah. Must have been hard to see it. It was harder not to. She paused, the memory thick in her chest. When I enlisted, they told me I could request standard issue. I didn't. I wanted this. I wanted to know what he saw when he aimed down that barrel. I wanted to feel what he felt. Tors nodded slowly. Closure. She looked at him, eyes steady, not angry, not sad. No connection. The word lingered between them like smoke. The base generator hummed in the distance, the steady rhythm of electricity and routine. Somewhere, laughter echoed faintly, other Marines unwinding, forgetting. But not her. Not tonight. Tors finally broke the silence again. You ever think, maybe he'd want you to let it go? She considered that for a moment. Maybe, but letting go isn't forgetting, and forgetting isn't peace. He nodded again. You sound like someone who's thought about that a lot. She looked up at the stars, sharp, countless, distant, every night. For a moment, she seemed far away, lost in the space between what was and what could have been. Tors wanted to say something, but stopped. There were no right words for a wound like that. Some things just stayed open, not to bleed, but to remind you that you survived. Finally, he asked, You ever fire that rifle in combat? Elena nodded slowly. Once. The way she said it changed the air around them. When? She didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the desert again. Iraq, Ramadi. We were pinned in a compound, 5 of us. I took this rifle because our standard DMR was down. Long range wasn't part of the plan, but she hesitated. It became the only plan. Tors listened without moving. They had high ground, 4 shooters on rooftops, 1 spotter. I took them all, one by one, 1,800 meters on the last. Her voice didn't shake, but it wasn't pride either. It was confession. Afterward, I couldn't stop shaking, not because of what I did, but because I realized how steady my hands had been. Tors didn't speak for a while. Then he said quietly, "You don't miss because you can't afford to." She nodded. When you've lived through what takes someone you love, precision becomes a kind of prayer. The words hit him harder than he expected. "Does it ever stop?" he asked. "The noise," she said, "the guilt, the wondering if you could have changed something." He nodded. "No," she said simply, "but you get better at carrying it." They sat in silence again, the kind that said more than words ever could. When Tors finally stood to leave, he hesitated. "You know," he said, "some of the guys were planning to turn your story into a joke, about the rifle, the shots, all of it." She raised an eyebrow. "Were?" He smiled faintly. "Were, until they saw you shoot." She looked back toward the horizon. "They'll forget by next week." "Maybe, but I won't." He started to walk away, then stopped again. "You're not just carrying a rifle, Alina. You're carrying a ghost. Just make sure it's not the other way around." She didn't answer, but her silence said she'd heard him. When he disappeared into the shadows, she sat a while longer, staring at the sand. Then she picked up the rifle, checked the chamber empty, and began to clean it. Every motion was slow, precise, deliberate, like prayer. Her father used to say, "You don't clean your weapon because it's dirty. You clean it because you owe it respect." The habit had stayed long after the grief had dulled. As the bolt slid home, her eyes caught on a small engraving beneath the stock, faint initials she hadn't noticed before. Not hers, not her father's either. They read DV. She froze. Her father's name was Michael Voss, so who was DV? She turned the rifle over, tracing the letters with her thumb. The engraving was old, maybe decades older than when her father had even joined the Corps. She frowned, then whispered to herself, "Who carried you before him?" The question lingered longer than it should have. That night she didn't sleep. The next morning the base was quiet, dew on the sand, cool air cutting through the memory of heat. She walked to the armory before dawn. The armorer on duty looked up, startled. "Corporal Voss," he said, rubbing sleep from his eyes, "you're early." "I need a record," she said, "serial trace on a rifle." He blinked. "You mean that rifle?" "Yes." He shrugged. "Sure, but that thing's older than me, might take a bit." He typed the serial number into the terminal, squinting at the ancient digits stamped into the receiver. The screen flickered for a while, searching, then stopped. The man frowned. "That's odd." "What?" "This rifle, been in circulation for over 70 years. Alina's eyes narrowed. 70. He nodded. "Issued in 67. Assigned to a Lance Corporal David Voss. Vietnam era. Reported missing during the Battle of Khe Sanh. Recovered in 69, reissued, decommissioned, reissued again in the 2000s. Her chest tightened. "David Voss." "Yeah." She stared at the letters again. DV. Her grandfather. The realization hit like recoil. 3 generations. The same rifle. Passed through wars that changed everything except the people holding it. The armorer whistled. "That's one hell of a family heirloom, Corporal." She swallowed. "Yeah, it is." When she stepped outside, the sun was breaking over the horizon. The same light that had seen men like her grandfather march through Vietnam's jungles, her father through Iraq's dust, and now her through deserts of her own. She lifted the rifle once more, feeling its weight anew. It wasn't just history, it was legacy, a thread of defiance stitched through time. Later that morning, when the unit assembled for debrief, Morrison's tone was lighter, but his eyes still held that question, that curiosity about her silence, her poise, her reason. "Corporal Voss," he said after the others had gone, "you ever think of teaching? We could use your steadiness at Quantico." She smiled faintly, "Maybe someday." He nodded. "If you ever change your mind, the Corps will make room." As she left the range, the other Marines saluted her quietly, not as rank to rank but as soldier to soldier. Respect without ceremony. Torres caught up with her near the gate. "So," he said, "what happens now?" She adjusted the sling over her shoulder. "Now. Yeah, you've proven yourself. I'll shot everyone what's left." She looked down at the rifle, then back at him. "Now I learn to miss." He frowned. "Miss?" She nodded. "Not on the range, in life. The people you lose, the things you can't hold, that's harder than hitting any target." He smiled, shaking his head. "You really do talk like a ghost sometimes." She smirked faintly. "Maybe that's because I live with one." They walked in silence for a while, boots crunching over gravel. At the armory door she paused. "Tours." "Yeah. Thanks for not laughing." He grinned. "You earned that." She gave a short nod, then turned away, her figure small against the vast desert. The rusted rifle caught the morning light again, the initials beneath the stock glowing faintly like a secret the world had forgotten. That night in her bunk, Elena finally slept. And for the first time in years, her dreams didn't smell like gunpowder or dust. They smelled like home. She didn't want the assignment. When the orders came through, they didn't feel like a promotion. They felt like punishment. Quantico, marksmanship instructor cadre. It meant leaving the field, leaving the wind and silence of the range she'd learned to understand better than people. It meant swapping her own solitude for classrooms full of half-trained recruits with too much confidence and not enough listening in their blood. But the Corps doesn't ask, it assigns. And so, 3 weeks later, Corporal Elena Voss stepped off the transport onto the red dirt and pine-shadowed air of Quantico. The smell was different, not burnt powder and sand, but oil, earth, and damp iron. The mountains rolled like sleeping giants in the distance. This place had seen every Marine come through at least once, but few returned the same way. She wasn't sure she wanted to. The training cadre met her with clipped salutes and cautious curiosity. Word of her performance in the desert had traveled faster than she had. The whispers followed like shadows. "That's her. The one with the antique rifle. Yeah, shot perfect through 900 with irons." When she arrived at the armory to check in her weapon, the senior instructor, Gunnery Sergeant Hale, gave her a long, slow look. He was old school, the kind of Marine who looked like he'd been carved out of boot leather and bad decisions. "So you're the ghost shooter," he said, leaning on the counter. "I'm Corporal Voss, sir." He smirked. "I read your file, you don't miss much, huh?" "I try not to, sir." Try, we'll see about that." He nodded toward the rifle case on her back. "That the one?" "Yes, sir." "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated just long enough for him to notice, then opened the case. The M14 lay inside, still worn, still rusted in the right places, still alive with its quiet defiance. Hale's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "My dad carried one of these in Hue," he said. "Didn't come back with it." Elena met his eyes. "Mine didn't either." For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. He nodded once, closed the case gently, and said, "All right, Voss. You start with range 4 tomorrow. Fresh recruits. Don't scare them too bad." The next morning, mist hung low over the shooting range. Dozens of recruits lined up awkwardly, helmets slightly crooked, rifles spotless and unfamiliar. Elena walked the line in silence, her boots leaving shallow prints in the dew. Most of them barely looked at her, just another instructor, another name, until they saw the rifle slung across her shoulder. Whispers started again. "Is that wood?" No way they let her use that thing. She looks like she stole it from a museum. Elena ignored them. She'd heard it all before. But one recruit, a tall girl with nervous hands, raised her voice, shaky but curious. "Ma'am, why do you use that old rifle?" Elena turned slightly, her tone calm. "Because it hasn't failed me yet." That quiet answer carried more weight than she realized. The whispers stopped. She gestured to the targets downrange, crisp silhouettes at 200 meters. "First rule of marksmanship," she said, voice steady but commanding. "The rifle is only as good as the respect you give it. You treat it like a tool, it'll fail you. You treat it like a promise, it won't." Some recruits exchanged puzzled looks. Others just nodded because they didn't know what else to do. "Now," she said, "show me how you breathe." The next hour was chaos, as every first range day was. Jerky motions, poor stance, rushed shots. Mags fumbled, chambers jammed, tempers rose. She didn't yell, she didn't bark orders. She just moved among them, quiet and precise, adjusting postures, steadying hands, showing rather than telling. "Slow down," she murmured to one. "Your finger's not a trigger, it's a heartbeat. Don't pull, let it break. Trust the rifle to do its part." By the end of the morning, a few had started to understand. The tall girl, recruit Daniels, was the first to hit 545. When she did, she turned toward Elena, a mix of pride and disbelief in her eyes. "I didn't think I could," she said. Elena nodded. "That's why you did." Daniels blinked. "Ma'am, you thought you couldn't, so you stopped overthinking." The girl smiled shyly, then went back to the line. Gunnery Sergeant Hale watched from the observation deck, arms crossed. "You've got them listening," he said later. Elena shrugged. "They're not listening to me, they're listening to themselves for the first time." He nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, it's working." Then he added, softer, "You ever think teaching might be what you were meant for?" She shook her head. "I was meant to shoot, Gunny." He chuckled. "Maybe, but sometimes the best shooters aren't the ones pulling the trigger. They're the ones who make sure others can." Days turned to weeks. Her presence on the range became legend. Recruits who once rolled their eyes now showed up early, cleaning their weapons twice, listening when she spoke. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. Respect isn't volume, it's consistency. But the past never fully sleeps. One afternoon, during a wind drill, a recruit accidentally chambered a live round during dry fire. The rifle discharged downrange, missing another recruit by inches. The sound was deafening, and for Elena, it wasn't the range anymore. It was Sanguine. It was her father's voice cutting off mid-sentence, the sound of radio static and breathless fear. She froze, just for a moment, just long enough for the recruits to notice. Then she blinked it away, moved forward and cleared the rifle with perfect calm. "Safety violation," she said, voice controlled. "No one moves until I say." Her tone left no room for panic. When the report went to Hale, he asked the obvious question, "You good?" She nodded. "Just noise, Gunny." But that night she dreamed again, the same dream she always had when the noise got too close. A desert horizon, empty except for one figure walking away, fading into dust. Her father. He never turned around. By the end of the training cycle, her platoon had the highest marksmanship average in the program. Word spread through the base. The Rust rifle instructor had done it again. When graduation came, Daniels, the tall girl who once trembled at her first shot, approached Elena during dismissal. "Ma'am." "Yes, Private." Daniels hesitated. "My dad was in Afghanistan. He didn't come home either." Elena's eyes softened. "I'm sorry." Daniels nodded. "I just wanted to say thank you for teaching me how to aim without shaking." Elena smiled faintly. "That's not something I taught you. You just stopped trying to aim through fear." Daniels blinked. "I don't understand." "You will," Elena said. One day when the silence starts to make sense. After the ceremony, Gunnery Sergeant Hale called her into his office. The blinds were half drawn, the afternoon light slicing across the desk. He didn't waste words. Command impressed. They want you for a new program, long-range mentorship, small unit tactics, counter-sniper integration, instructor-led. She frowned. Another teaching post. Temporary, you'll travel, observe, train in different climates, share your methods. She stayed quiet. You don't want it, he said flatly. She shook her head. No, I don't want to keep digging through ghosts. He leaned back, studying her. You think ghosts leave because you stop digging. Her silence was answer enough. Corporal, he said, softer now, I've seen a lot of Marines try to outrun what they carry. Doesn't work. You can't leave it behind, but you can pass something forward. That made her look up. Maybe that's what your father was trying to do, Hale said. Maybe that's what this rifle been trying to do all along. She didn't answer, not right away. But that night she sat again in her quarters, the rifle across her knees. The initials DV caught the lamplight, and beneath them she noticed something she hadn't before. A second set, so faint she'd never seen it until now. MV carved almost invisibly below the first. Her father had added his. She stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling just slightly. Then she pulled out her knife. Slowly, carefully, she began to carve 3 more letters beneath the rest. EV. The wood flaked softly under her blade, the lines uneven but deliberate. When she finished, she whispered, That's enough ghosts for now. The next morning, Hale found her waiting at his office before dawn. I'll take the assignment, she said. He smiled faintly. Didn't doubt you would. She returned the smile, a real one this time, small but steady. Maybe it's time someone else learns to stop missing. He handed her the orders. Pack light, you leave tomorrow. As she turned to go, he said, Vas. She paused at the doorway. Don't forget what you told me when you first got here. What's that? You said you were meant to shoot. Maybe that's true. But sometimes, Corporal, the most important shot isn't the one you take. It's the one you teach. She nodded, the words sinking deep. Understood, Gunny. When she walked out, the sunrise hit the base like fire over glass. She looked down at the rifle one last time before stepping into the light. For the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt alive. She didn't expect to feel nervous again. After everything, the deserts, the ghosts, the perfect scores, Corporal Elena Voss thought she'd run out of fear. But when the transport touched down at Camp Donnelly, a forward training base deep in the Carolina woods, her hands shook just slightly on the straps of her pack. The orders were simple: observe, instruct, adapt. What they didn't say was how. The base wasn't like Quantico. It was smaller, rougher, a half-forgotten outpost used for rotational exercises and specialized training. The barracks leaned with age. The armory smelled like oil and rain. But the shooters here weren't recruits. They were line soldiers, combat veterans, the kind who didn't like being told they could do better. She'd seen the look before, pride with a chip in it. Gunnery Sergeant Hale's words echoed in her head. The most important shot isn't the one you take. It's the one you teach. She hoped he was right. The first morning began like every range day, dew on the grass, low mist curling through pine trunks. 20 soldiers waited in the firing pits, their rifles gleaming under the gray light. They weren't fresh faces. Most wore combat ribbons. A few had scars. One man, tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet, carried a DMR with custom engraving that probably cost more than her car. His name tag read, S. Reeves. He didn't look impressed. As she stepped up to the line, a few of them gave her polite nods. Others just folded their arms. Morning, she said simply. No rank pulled, no lecture. Just that. Then she slung the old M14 from her shoulder and set it on the table. That got their attention. A few snickered quietly. Reeves didn't. He just stared at the rifle, not with mockery, but with calculation. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat, "that your personal weapon?" "It is." "Looks like it's been through 3 wars." "It has." A faint smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "Then it must be tired." She met his eyes. "It's earned it." That silenced him, and earned her a few raised eyebrows down the line. She walked slowly in front of the group, her boots crunching softly on the gravel. "You're not here to learn how to shoot," she said. "You already know that. You're here to learn how not to miss when it matters." One soldier frowned. "Same thing, isn't it?" She looked at him. "No, shooting is math, not missing is memory." The phrase hung in the air. Some nodded, others frowned. Reeves smirked faintly. "Sounds poetic. We doing poetry or practice?" Alina didn't react. She just said both. By noon, she had them firing at 400 meters crosswind, variable visibility. It was messy. Most were solid, a few exceptional, but none consistent. Reeves shot fast, confident, and just off-center. Every group was tight, but never perfect. He muttered curses under his breath after each miss. When the last round fired, Alina walked over, crouched beside his position, and looked at his target. 4 inches right, she said quietly. "I know. You pulled when you exhaled." "I know that too." "Then why keep doing it?" He looked at her annoyed. "You ever been shot at, ma'am?" "Yes." "Then you know it's not breathing that messes you up. It's the heartbeat." She nodded. "And you're trying to fight it instead of listen to it." Reeves frowned. "Excuse me." She tapped his chest plate lightly. "You're trying to silence the one thing that's keeping you alive. Learn to fire with it, not against it." He didn't answer, but his eyes softened slightly. He wasn't used to being challenged without being condescended to. "Try again," she said, standing. "This time don't aim, feel." He scoffed. "Feel?" "Yes." He sighed but chambered another round, adjusted his cheek weld, waited. Crack. Center hit. His brow furrowed. "That was." "Coincidence," she offered. He looked at her. "You tell me." She smiled faintly. "You tell me." Over the next days, something began to shift. She didn't push, she didn't command, she just watched, corrected posture, adjusted timing, made them think less, sense more. Her method wasn't standard doctrine, it was something older, quieter. It frustrated some, fascinated others. Reeves especially. He challenged her constantly, about angles, math, history, doctrine. But every time she had an answer that wasn't from a manual. "You ever miss?" he asked once, half joking. "Every day," she said. He blinked seriously. "Not on the range," she clarified. "In life." That shut him up for a while. By the end of week 2, his shooting was cleaner, quieter. The others followed suit. The range sounded less like noise and more like rhythm. But what Alina didn't expect, what she didn't prepare for, was how teaching soldiers who still had something to lose reopened the wound of losing everything herself. Each face reminded her of someone. Each laugh echoed her father's. Each briefing room carried the ghost of her old unit. And late at night, when the camp fell silent, she sat by the armory bench cleaning her rifle, the same ritual she'd done for years. Only this time, she wasn't sure if it was to maintain discipline or keep from falling apart. One evening, rain swept across the range, thick, warm, relentless. The soldiers had packed up. The range lights flickered against the storm. Alina stayed. The rain drummed against the rifle case. She opened it, laid the M14 across her knees, and stared at the initials again. DV, MV, EV. 3 generations. She whispered softly, "I hope I'm doing right by you." Behind her a voice said, "Talking to ghosts again." She turned. Reeves stood under the overhang, rain dripping from his cap. "You move quiet," she said. You sit quiet, he replied. Thought I'd check if you were part of the furniture. She smiled faintly, almost. He stepped closer. That rifle means something to you. It's family. He nodded. Thought so. You treat it like you're holding a memory. I am. He leaned against the wall, folding his arms. You ever think that maybe memories are meant to fade? She met his eyes. You ever think maybe some aren't allowed to? He smirked, touché. The rain grew heavier. They stood in silence for a while, the kind that said more than talking could. Then he said quietly, I lost someone too. Afghanistan, best friend, same patrol, one wrong turn. Her expression softened. I'm sorry. He nodded. I tell myself I carry him every time I pull the trigger, but lately I wonder if I'm just keeping him from resting. Alina looked down at her rifle again. Maybe both can be true. He studied her for a long moment. You ever wonder if you keep shooting so you don't have to stop remembering? She didn't answer because he was right. The rain thundered harder. Somewhere in the darkness, lightning cracked, white and violent. Reeves looked out at it. You know, when they told us we were getting a precision instructor, I expected someone with a fancy rifle and a stick up their ass. Disappointed. He smiled completely. She laughed softly, the first time he'd heard her do it. Maybe that's the point, she said. You expect perfection, you get persistence instead. Same thing, isn't it? No, perfection is sterile, persistence is human. He nodded slowly, and pain. She looked at him, the faintest sadness in her eyes. Pain is proof it mattered. He said nothing more, just stood there in the rain beside her, both of them holding the weight of ghosts too stubborn to leave. The next morning, something was different. Reeves arrived before dawn, soaked, tired but focused. Wind shifting west, he said. Visibility down, let's run a drill. She raised an eyebrow, voluntary. Considerate curiosity. They shot in the fog. No orders, no ranks, no audience, just the two of them. At first Reeves fired fast, mechanical, then slower, then something clicked. He stopped overthinking. His breathing matched the rhythm of his pulse. The sound of the trigger blended with the heartbeat in his chest. Each shot found its mark. After his 10th hit, he lowered the rifle and exhaled. That one felt different. She nodded. You stopped fighting the silence. He looked at her, then said softly, You ever stop fighting yours? She didn't answer. That night, as the soldiers celebrated the end of the rotation, Alina sat alone again. Not sad, just still. Reeves approached quietly. You heading back to Quantico after this? Maybe. Orders haven't said yet. He hesitated. If they don't, you should stay. The guys listen to you. Hell, I listen to you. She smiled faintly. That's new. He grinned. Don't get used to it. Then his tone softened. Seriously, you made me remember why I started. I forgot somewhere along the way. She met his gaze. Then my job's done. He frowned slightly. What about you? You remember why you started? Her eyes dropped to the rifle beside her. Every time I fire it. Reeves nodded, then offered his hand. For what it's worth, you're not the ghost I expected. She took his hand. And you're not the skeptic I thought you were. He smiled, stepped back and saluted. Safe travels, Voss. She returned it, you too. As he walked away, she whispered to herself, maybe ghosts don't fade, maybe they teach. The night air was cool, the rain had stopped, the world smelled clean again. For the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe without the echo of loss pressing against her ribs. The rifle beside her wasn't just a relic anymore. It was inheritance and hope. They told her it wasn't a combat mission. That was the first lie. Officially, she was being sent overseas as an advisory liaison to observe and assist a local security unit in long-range reconnaissance and precision support. Simple, contained, low risk. But Alina Voss had worn the uniform long enough to know that no mission stays small when the world decides otherwise. The airfield in Djibouti was hot enough to burn the skin off steel. The sun was an open wound. Marines moved like shadows across the tarmac, loading supplies onto trucks bound for the outpost 200 kilometers inland, the real destination. Alina carried her rifle the way she always did, across her shoulder, unassuming, quiet, scarred. The younger Marines eyed it with curiosity. "Ma'am, you sure that thing still feels ready?" one asked. "It's more ready than most of us," she said, climbing into the transport. No one laughed, but they smiled, the way soldiers do when they sense steadiness in someone they don't yet understand. The drive took 6 hours through dust and nothingness. The horizon never changed, just sand, stone, and sky. When they finally reached the forward post, the landscape felt more like the surface of another planet than Earth. A few prefabricated shelters, a radar tower, a communications array, and a line of soldiers who looked worn thin by months of waiting for something to happen. Their commanding officer, Lieutenant Raj Singh, greeted her with a tired salute. "Corporal Voss, right? We've heard stories." "I'm sure most of them are wrong," she replied. "Probably," he said, smirking faintly, "but we could use a legend right about now." He led her through the camp, maps pinned to walls, coordinates marked in red, faces strained. "Situation?" she asked. "Harassment fire from militia groups," he said. "Long-range sniping. Random times, random angles. They're not trying to hit us. They're trying to remind us they're out there." "Psychological pressure." "Exactly. We've lost 2 to ricochets and 1 to a bad reaction during night watch. Morale's bleeding out slow." Alina nodded. "You have counter-sniper capabilities." "Technically, but my guys are tired and the terrain's killing our optics. Sand, glare, crosswind, mirage." She looked out across the endless dunes. "Then we'll use the one thing that doesn't lie." "What's that?" "Instinct." By nightfall, she'd set up her observation point, a low rise overlooking the valley. The stars here were brighter than she'd seen anywhere since Iraq. She lay prone, M14 steady on its bipod, breathing slow, eyes scanning through iron sights. Most shooters would have laughed at the setup. No smart scope, no rangefinder, no AI wind assist. Just a human heartbeat and 70 years of memory. Singh crouched beside her, squinting through his own high-tech optic. "You really prefer irons in this environment?" "They don't fog," she said. He chuckled, "Fair." They waited. The desert was quiet, too quiet. Around midnight, a faint glint flashed on a distant ridge. "Contact," she whispered. Singh froze. "You sure?" She adjusted slightly, reading the shimmer, the shape. A rifle barrel, long, stationary, patient. "He's been there for hours," she murmured, "waiting for us to make the first mistake." "Range?" 860 meters. He frowned. "You can tell by eye." She didn't answer. She just inhaled slowly. The desert exhaled with her. She waited, one breath, too. The glint shifted just slightly, enough. Her finger moved. Crack. The sound echoed across the valley, deep and final. A heartbeat later, a dark shape slumped. "Hit," Singh whispered, disbelief and respect blending in his voice. Alina didn't celebrate, she just whispered, he wasn't the only one. Singh frowned. "What?" She was already moving the rifle. "There's a spotter farther back, 10 o'clock, shadow line." He followed her direction, eyes wide. "How the hell did you?" Crack. Silence. She exhaled. "They work in pairs." By morning, word had spread through the camp. The night harassment fire had stopped completely. When she entered the mess tent, conversations paused. Then quiet applause began, not loud, not performative, just respect. Singh raised his coffee mug. "Remind me never to bet against a rusted rifle." Alina smirked faintly. Smart choice. He leaned forward, tone softening. You ever miss? Once. When? She stared at her coffee for a long time before answering. When it mattered most. He didn't ask more. The silence was answer enough. 3 days passed without incident. The camp relaxed too much, maybe. On the fourth day, everything changed. The first shot came at dawn, sudden, close, too close. A perimeter guard went down instantly. Then chaos, shouting, scrambling, dust exploding from impact zones. Alina dropped behind cover, rifle up, eyes scanning. Direction, Singh shouted. East Ridge, she called back. 2 shooters, maybe 3. Bullets snapped overhead. The sound of panic spread faster than gunfire. She crawled forward, found a gap in the sand berm and set up. Through her irons she saw them, 3 figures moving between rocks, disciplined, experienced. These weren't harassers, these were hunters. Singh's voice crackled in her earpiece. We've got no visual confirmation. They're flanking. Not if I stop them, she said. She centered her sights on the first wind shift, slight right. Inhale, exhale. Crack. Target down. Second, ducking low, sprinting. Crack. Miss. A flash of memory hit her, her father's last transmission, the silence that followed. For the first time in years, her hands trembled. She forced the noise away. The heartbeat that had always been her rhythm was suddenly louder, too loud. She blinked hard, swallowed the fear. Then she saw him, the third shooter, kneeling beside a downed comrade, not aiming, just still. Through the haze, she realized something. He wasn't an enemy. He was barely older than a boy, maybe 16. Her finger froze. Voss, Singh shouted, take the shot. She hesitated. He looked terrified, gun half raised, shaking. She whispered, he's not ready to pull that trigger. Voss. Her breath caught. The boy's rifle tilted upward but not toward her. He fired wildly, missing everything. Fear, not training. She fired once. Sand kicked up beside him. Warning, not death. He dropped his weapon and ran. The ridge went quiet. Singh's voice was tense. Report. Threat neutralized. You didn't hit him. No, she said softly, I didn't. Hours later, the debrief was quiet. Singh stood with folded arms. You had a clear shot. Yes, sir. You chose not to take it. Yes, sir. Why? Alina's voice was calm. Because he didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't fighting. He was surviving. There's a difference. Singh exhaled slowly. You risked exposure. I risked being human. He didn't argue, just nodded. You did good, Voss, maybe better than I would've. She gave a small nod, then turned to leave. Outside, the horizon burned gold under the setting sun. She sat on the sand, the M14 across her lap. The initials gleamed faintly, DV, MV, EV, 3 lines of endurance, etched by hands that had seen too much. She thought of her father again, how he'd stayed behind to cover his men, how he'd chosen to die so others wouldn't have to. She'd always believed her purpose was to finish what he started. But maybe it was. Maybe it was to end it. She ran her hand along the rifle's stock, feeling the roughness, the history. You don't win wars by shooting faster, she whispered. You win them by remembering when not to. For a long time she sat there still, silent, at peace. The desert wind blew soft against her face. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled not from battle, but from the coming rain. And for the first time she didn't brace for it, she just let it come. The next morning, the boy she'd spared turned up. Captured, disarmed, dehydrated but alive. When Singh brought her to the holding tent, the local commander was furious. He was firing on you, he shouted. Why didn't you finish it? Alina looked at the boy, shaking, terrified, a patch of dirt streaking his cheek. He couldn't have been more than 17. Because one shot can save a life, she said quietly, not always end it. The commander stared at her like he didn't understand the language she was speaking. But Singh did. Later, as they watched the sunrise together, he said, "You ever think your father would have done the same?" She took a long breath. "I think he'd finally understand why I still carry his rifle." Singh smiled faintly. "And why's that?" She looked toward the horizon, where night bled into light. "Because every scar on it reminds me that mercy leaves marks too." That night she wrote her report by flashlight. The last line read, "Confirmed engagement, 2 neutralized, 1 spared, mission concluded. Recommend further observation of local youth combatants. Most appear untrained, coerced, or desperate. Sometimes the enemy isn't evil, he's just scared." She signed it, set it aside, and looked at the rifle one last time before closing her eyes. The old steel gleamed like it was breathing again. Her father's voice echoed in memory, soft, distant, proud. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She smiled. "Yeah, Dad," she whispered, "it does." And for the first time, she slept without ghosts. Home didn't sound the same anymore. The air was softer, the streets quieter. Even the way the wind moved through the trees felt slower, like the world had taken a deep breath in her absence and forgotten to let it out. Corporal Elena Voss stepped off the bus just outside her hometown, a place that hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same diner with peeling red paint. The same water tower, still leaning just slightly toward the highway. The same silence. But she wasn't the same. Her uniform was crisp, her medals tucked away in a pack she hadn't opened since the desert. Her rifle case hung by her side, heavy not from weight, but from memory. She'd been discharged 2 months early, voluntary. The Corps had tried to convince her to stay, to train more, teach more, lead more. But she'd learned something in that last desert. Some lessons aren't meant to be taught forever. They're meant to be lived once and left behind. The house she grew up in sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by tall grass and stubborn oaks. It looked smaller now, the windows clouded by years of rain and disuse. The porch steps sagged, the paint chipped. Inside, it still smelled faintly of oil, gun cleaner, and her father's old cologne, that faint, steady scent of steel and soap. She stood there for a long time, her pack at her feet, staring at the empty chair by the window, the one he used to sit in when he came home from the range. The M14 rested in her hands, the metal warm against her palm. She walked into the small back room, once his workshop, now covered in dust. His tools still hung in neat rows. His shooting log lay open on the table, yellowed with age. The last line read, "Range 800, crosswind 12 knots, adjusted, hit." She ran her fingers over the faded words. "You always did hate missing," she whispered. The next morning, she drove out to the range outside town, the same one her father had taught her on when she was 12. The sign still read Voss County Rifle Association. Her grandfather had helped build it after returning from Vietnam. Now it was empty, except for the sound of birds and the soft creak of the wind flag. She sat up at the far bench, the old rifle laid out in front of her. Her hands moved slowly, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Chamber check, action clear, iron sights aligned. The world around her fell away. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was aiming at anything. She was simply present. Her father's voice echoed in memory, soft and patient. "Don't fight the wind, kid. Learn its rhythm. Let it teach you something." She exhaled, steady and slow. Then she lowered the rifle. For the first time since she enlisted, she didn't pull the trigger. She just sat there, breathing, listening. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was full. It took her years to understand that not every weapon needed to fire to be powerful. Sometimes restraint is the sharpest aim of all. Later that week, she found herself walking down the halls of the local high school. The principal, an old family friend, had called her in. "They're starting a community marksmanship program," he'd said over the phone. "You don't have to shoot, just talk to them. They need someone who's seen the weight of what a trigger can do." She almost said no, but something about the tone, the earnestness, made her stop. Now, standing before a classroom full of teenagers in uniform hoodies and restless energy, she wasn't sure what to say. The room was silent, every eye on her. She set the rifle case down on the desk. The kids leaned forward slightly, curious. "This," she said, opening it slowly, "is older than your grandparents." Gasps. One boy raised his hand. "Is that real?" "It is," she said softly, "and it's been to more wars than I ever will." Another asked, "How many people did it, you know?" She met the question with a steady gaze. "Enough, too many, but that's not what makes it important." She stepped back, letting them see the rifle fully, the wood scarred, the metal dull, the initials carved deep. "This rifle has 3 names on it," she said. "Each belonged to someone in my family. Each one carried it for a different reason. One fought for his brothers, one fought to protect, and me." She paused, searching for the words. "I carried it to understand." The kids listened, the restless energy gone now, replaced by the kind of quiet that means they're feeling something they don't yet have words for. "I used to think strength meant never missing," she continued, "never failing, but I was wrong. Strength isn't about never missing, it's about knowing which shots you shouldn't take." A girl in the front whispered, "Like mercy." Alina smiled faintly, "Exactly." She let them hold the rifle, one by one, carefully, reverently. They traced the initials, asked questions about the scratches, the rust, the age. Each one learned something different, though none of them could have said what it was. When the last student handed it back, she said softly, "Every mark on this rifle tells a story. Some are victories, some are regrets, but they all remind me of one thing: you can carry a weapon your whole life and still choose peace." That night, she sat by the river that ran behind her house. The moonlight cut across the water like silver thread. The rifle lay beside her, quiet. The air was cool, the kind that smells like rain and home. For the first time, she wasn't guarding the rifle like a memory she couldn't lose. She was holding it like a story she'd finally finished reading. She traced the initials one last time: DV for her grandfather, MV for her father, EV for herself. And then, for reasons she didn't fully understand, she added one more, just 2 small letters beneath the rest. HR. She smiled. Honor remembered. The following morning, she visited the Veterans Memorial outside town. Rows of names carved in stone, flags fluttering in the wind. She found her father's name near the bottom. She knelt, placed the rifle at the base of the wall, and whispered, "It's done." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she stood, saluted, and walked away, leaving the rifle where it belonged. Not in a glass case, not in storage, but beside the men and women who'd carried their burdens until the world forgot their names. When she reached the gate, a park ranger called after her, "Ma'am, you forgot your weapon." She turned, smiled faintly, and said, "No, I didn't." Then she kept walking. Weeks later, a young Marine recruit visiting the memorial stopped at the same spot. He noticed the old M14, still leaning against the stone, the initials carved deep, and the metal dulled by time. He called his instructor over. "Sir, what's this doing here?" The instructor looked at the rifle for a long moment. His face softened. "It belongs there," he said. "Whose was it?" The man smiled faintly. "Someone who didn't miss." The recruit frowned. "A sniper." The instructor shook his head. "No, a teacher." That evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, the light caught the rifle's stock just right, enough to make the carved letters gleam for a heartbeat before fading back into shadow. Wind whispered through the flags above, carrying the faintest echo of a voice. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And for the first time in a long time, in the silence of that sacred place, peace sounded exactly like a shot that was never fired.